Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very fun and colorful card for you guys using embossing folders. Now embossing folders are my absolute favorite. I have created so many cards using them. But this technique here is something new to me. Well, it's an absolute rage right now in the card making world where I see a lot of crafters using this technique to create beautiful card fronts. Here I have a card where I have used the embossing folder, the debossed side of the embossing folder, used a lot of color and there is a lot of texture and sparkle, and this is a technique that you could easily use to mass produce your cards. Let us take a look at the products that we will need for this technique. Well, I have an embossing folder here. This is the Blossom Swag embossing folder. It's a 3D embossing folder which was part of the Simon Says Stamp August 2024 card kit. Now, I have noticed that 3D embossing folders work best for this technique as it gives a lot of lift and texture to our paper. Now for the blackout technique, we will be using the debossed side of the embossing folder, that is the dented side. Usually for most of my card videos, I have used the embossed side or the side which is raised and has texture on it. But for this one, we are using the debossed side and coloring in all of those indented patterns that is formed on the paper. Here I am using some white cardstock and I like to spray some water on it just to prevent the paper from cracking. Now here's a closer look at the cardstock. This is the embossed side, the raised portion, and this is the debossed side. This is where we will be using all of our coloring and ink blending. To color these beautiful floral arrangement, I'm using my Spectrum Noir TriBlend markers, and I will be using these to color all of the flowers and the leaves and little berries on this floral arrangement. Just make sure that you have color on all of these nooks and crannies, and you need not be perfect here. It's okay if your color seems to be out of line and out of that debossed image. We will be covering it up with our ink pad. For all of my flowers here, I have used shades of pinks and reds and maroons. And for the leaves and all the branches, I have two different shades of greens. You will also notice that I left some of the flowers white with just some yellow center over it. That will give a beautiful texture and added interest to this card. Here's a look at the panel. Now this doesn't look as perfect as it should be, but the ink pad that we are going to use here will cover all of those imperfections. I'm using the violet shade from the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated Ink Collection. All you need to do is swipe the pad onto the panel. The ink will be picked up by the raised portion of the paper, and all of the debossed image and the colored image will not catch this ink. You could also use a brayer tool to add proper layer of color, but I like some of these imperfections that I'm getting here. Don't worry about that big blob of ink that is on the center of this card panel. The beauty about Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks are that once it dries, the color kind of settles down and it's not as dark as it seems. I went ahead and swiped this ink pad a couple of times until I got the desired result. If you want a more smoother finish, I would suggest using a brayer tool. Now after I was done swiping the ink pad, I noticed there was still some white areas on my leaves and flowers. So I went ahead and used my TriBlend markers and covered all of those white areas. I also wanted a little more added texture here, so I went a shade lighter and used Iris, which is a darker shade of this purple, and added just a few highlights here and there just to add some texture to my card. Now one tip here which I thought was very useful is using contrasting colors. Now for this panel, I wouldn't suggest using an ink pad which was either green or in the pink and red tones. Blue, purples, they give a contrast to this floral arrangement that we have created here. You could also go darker shades and or even use black ink pads for this technique. There was definitely a lot of ink from the alcohol markers which bled through the paper, but that will not harm our card base. You could just add some adhesive and stick it onto your card base. Now next I went ahead and added some splatter on this card front. Now if you know me, I like a lot of shine and sparkle on my card. So here I have some gold metallic watercolor which I like to splatter generously on the card front. Now once the splatter was dried, I adhered the panel using some foam tape. Now whenever I'm using embossing folder, since there is a lot of texture on the paper, I like to add foam tape which I feel secures the panel as compared to using a liquid adhesive or any kind of double-sided tape. Now, along with the gold metallic splatter, I thought it would be perfect to add some sequin mix. So here I have the gold hologram sequin mix by ThisCallsforConfetti, and I like to arrange them in odd numbers using my Barely Art glue. Now, here's a look at the finished card. I love how this turned out. There's another card I created using the exact same technique, but instead of coloring using my alcohol markers, I just ink blended using mini ink blending tools. And this turned out absolute perfection. I also used my shimmer pen on all of the leaves and berries for some shine and sparkle, and I changed the sentiment here and the orientation of the card. Like I mentioned before, this is a very fun technique. There's a lot of color, and this is something that you could use to mass produce cards. You could use so many different varieties of color combinations, different embossing folders, and create beautiful card fronts. I hope you had fun watching the video as much as I did creating these cards. Thank you for joining me today. I hope to see you again in my next video. Until next time, stay safe.